Whereas President Barack Obama spoke frequently about how the arc of the moral universe would ultimately bend toward justice. And for his part, President Ronald Reagan, who spoke of an America as a shining city on the hill, often said this, quote, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction." Donald J. Trump has taken to claiming on a near daily basis that a cadre of career public servants who worked toward justice and protected the rule of law under Democratic and Republican presidents and administrations should be jailed. Trump lashing out repeatedly at special counsel Jack Smith while traveling abroad, as well as other Department of Justice and FBI officials and leaders of watchdog groups in unhinged social media rants, some of them posted very late at night / very early in the morning, with a tone barely worthy of a Facebook comment section, much less pronouncements of policy from a president of the United States. In one rant posted on Wednesday, Donald Trump targeted our colleague and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, as well as fired FBI agent Walter Giardina. Giardina was pushed out of the FBI while he was caring for his dying wife. It's a move his supervisors called, quote, "inexcusably cruel" in a lawsuit they have brought against the Trump administration after they too were fired by Kash Patel. The agent, Giardina, was fired because he had been the agent who arrested Trump ally and advisor Peter Navarro. That happened when Navarro was indicted on contempt of Congress charges for blowing off a subpoena from the January 6th Select Committee. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley also alleged, among other things, that Giardina had destroyed records on a laptop when assigned to the Mueller investigation. It's the charge that Giardina denies. In fact, he says he was never issued a laptop by Mueller or the Mueller investigation. Now, Giardina is the target of the man with the world's largest megaphone, who has been steadily beating the drum on accusations that the January 6th investigation was some sort of witch hunt. It was not. January 6th took place in full view of the public. It led to multiple criminal charges that were never tried against Donald Trump in a court of law because after the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, there was no trial. There wasn't enough time to get to trial before he prevailed in the 2024 election. But even the right-wing publication National Review isn't buying what Trump is selling on this particular topic. They write this, quote, "The notion that there was something scandalous about the leadership at DOJ and the FBI approving an investigation into conduct that resulted in viable criminal charges is ridiculous. But facts be damned, Donald Trump has reoriented his government, all of it, his political movement, all of it, his allies in Congress, all of them, and the Justice Department and FBI around his desires for retribution. That campaign threatens to leave all Americans less safe because instead of doing the things they're supposed to do to keep us safe, they're doing retribution." As Carol Leonnig writes today in the New York Times, quote, "A deep and bipartisan bench of justice veterans say the department has reached a frightening tipping point. They warn that grave dangers now loom for all Americans. Without the real Department of Justice we have long taken for granted, public servants predict malevolent actors can freely engage in crimes, knowing they will never face consequences." Since taking office January 20th, Trump and his appointees have driven out or fired combined centuries worth of frontline expertise that will take decades to replace. Seasoned national security prosecutors and agents have sounded the alarm in our interviews. These departures leave us less prepared to stop the next terrorist attack or foreign state spying operation. The Trump administration pursuing Donald Trump's retribution and ticking off his enemies list at the expense of U.S. national security is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the FBI, MSNBC National Security and Intelligence Analyst Michael Feinberg is here. He's also a fellow at Lawfare. Also joining me, New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush, and my friend and colleague, MSNBC senior political analyst, contributing host on Pod Save America, and host of the new podcast, Runaway Country. Alex Wagner is here for the hour. Michael Feinberg, I start with you because you are one of those national security officials who, while we love being able to talk to you about these stories, I think we benefited probably more as a country having you inside the FBI. And I wonder what you make of what now is not a quirk or a bug, but a feature of Trump's presidency, a daily maligning of career FBI and Department of Justice officials?
It's morally horrifying, and as a more basic matter, it is not remotely grounded in fact. There is a misconception, whether inadvertent or purposeful, that the president keeps using where he seems to imply that FBI agents choose who to arrest and when to arrest somebody. It's important to remember that every single person associated with Trump's circle who was arrested and indicted during the first term or during the Biden term was done so by a grand jury of their peers. These are not unilateral FBI decisions. These are not DOJ decisions. These are decisions made by the citizenry of our country. So to say that it was an individual agent who brought Peter Navarro down, or that it was solely Jack Smith or Merrick Garland who had Trump indicted, is to elude the truth, which is that the defendants' own communities are the ones who decided to charge them.
And what does it say to the people left inside the FBI that this campaign of retribution continues long after people are fired, long after careers that I think most of you think you'll have for as long as you're interested in public service are abruptly ended by Donald Trump, that the abuse doesn't end? And he's rolling out names from 2017 that he attacked frequently that probably aren't known to a broader general public, but are characters in some of the right-wing conspiracy theories that have festered for years. And these are people that have been out of the Bureau and out of the department for years now.
Yeah, look, they're creating very powerful disincentives for people to work on politically sensitive cases. Unfortunately for our country, the politically sensitive cases are the most important ones for us to work because they're the ones that really provide guardrails and accountability for our democratic system. And I think it's worth noting here that a lot of the individuals who Trump names, yes, they worked in Democratic administrations, but they also worked under Republican leaders. You know, Andrew Weissman, Lisa Monaco, these are two people who worked at the FBI. Robert Mueller, who was as rock-ribbed a Republican as you can think of. If you think of the traditional sort of Northeastern, Southeastern conservative in American history, and you had to create an exemplar of that figure out of whole cloth, you would end up with Robert Mueller. Mm-hmm. So to say that the people who served under him were partisan warriors for the left is quite frankly ridiculous.
Glenn Thrush, you write about another person who's sort of an archetype of exactly who you want on the line on the national security side. I have no idea what his politics are, but you wrote this about Mr. Giardina, quote, Giardina, who regards his FBI service as an extension of his military commitment, said, quote, it was unfathomable to see my entire life, which has been focused on family and the FBI, to be torn apart in an instant. By the time Grassley went public with his claims, Colleen Giardina, his wife's health had already been deteriorating. At times, it seemed like her death and the end of his nearly two-decade career were racing each other on parallel tracks, her husband said. Mr. Giardina's wife suffered an adverse reaction to chemotherapy and began to pace back and forth relentlessly as she became increasingly sick. After she was admitted to the hospital, Mr. Giardina asked a nurse to reserve a conference room for an interview with the Congressional Affairs Office in hopes they would conduct a proper investigation to clear his name. They agreed to the meeting, then pulled out, he said. It was a nightmare, Mr. Giardina recalled. Mr. Giardina was on the receiving end of a post attacking him from Donald Trump while on a trip. He didn't seem well rested. Maybe attacking Mr. Giardina is the reason.
Look, it's no surprise that Peter Navarro, Donald Trump's trade advisor, his sort of the architect of his tariff policy, has been telling anyone who would listen to him about all the depredations of Giardina in his case. In fact, Giardina was given a list of instructions. He is the guy who arrested Navarro, who was, by the way, convicted of a crime by a jury of his peers. And Giardina apparently, from every telling of this incident, didn't do anything that he was not under instruction to do. So if, what Navarro's big issue is, and it has become a personal crusade for Peter Navarro to get this guy, or in his view, to hold this guy accountable. Essentially what Navarro has claimed is that that he was treated disrespectfully, that Giardina created a public spectacle. All the reporting that we've been able to ascertain in my interview with Giardina is that that wasn't necessarily the case. He was essentially following instructions. And the point that everyone has made is an accurate one. Particularly when you're talking about the FBI, the level of discretion that they have in terms of what to investigate and how to investigate it, when you get to the level of line agent, as Giardina is relatively circumscribed. In my interview with Giardina, he said to me something which will resonate. He said that he had two big decisions to make every time he went on an investigative trip. And number one was which hotel he got to stay in, and number two is where he got to have dinner.
Were you satisfied with what you heard in there?
Absolutely not. The level of transparency was not okay.
How did it go in there?
Not well.
Were you satisfied?
They didn't even show up with the lawyers. Am I leaving satisfied? Absolutely not.
No, I'm not satisfied. I'm a member of the United States Congress. I sit on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committee. Our job is to oversee the use of lethal force by our military outside of the United States. And I'm walking away without an understanding of how and why they're making an assessment that the use of lethal force is adequate here.
Members of the House Armed Services Committee were supposed to be briefed on the deadly strikes on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. But according to Democratic reps in the room, Pentagon lawyers didn't show up, and neither did the intelligence officials. And the White House policy staff who did show up, according to these House Democrats, couldn't give lawmakers any information. Meanwhile, on the Senate side, some Republicans got a briefing yesterday, but Democrats were not invited to it. Joining us now, Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. What is this meeting, and were you really not invited?
Katie, this is so freaking outrageous. I mean, this is not some process foul. We're talking about putting American troops in harm's way. A week earlier, I got the most classified brief in what's called the Gang of Eight. You know, the absolute leadership supposed to get the exact stuff the president gets. Marco Rubio, who's my friend and who I supported, promised me that we would have the legal opinion of why this is justified, because our sailors could be put in harm's way if they are, illegally killing folks without any legal justification. And he promised that. Now, I'm not going to blame Rubio because he immediately left town to go, around the world. But we were waiting for, when's the documents going to come? When are you going to provide a fuller brief? And then the outrageousness of saying, we're going to invite a few random Republicans, not necessarily folks that are on the appropriate committees, because they're afraid of the vote next week that may say, hey, Donald Trump, no, you can't go to war in Venezuela without some congressional oversight, to invite only Republicans. And I am beyond furious with this administration. In any normal world, somebody get fired, but I'm also and I'm a bipartisan guy. I'm so bitterly disappointed with my Republican friends that somebody in that room didn't say, holy crap, we're getting the most classified stuff that we've been asking for. Why aren't there any Democrats in this room? This is not a part of this. Oversight of our military and going to war should not be a partisan issue.
Why do you think there isn't that outrage? Why do you think you are not being included on this information?
Because I think you've got a crowd at the White House, and obviously you've seen this with Gabbard and Hegseth, that want to ignore Congress at every turn. Think they are control of everything. Frankly, that's one of the reasons why allies around the world, we've even had the Dutch acknowledge they're not going to share as much intelligence with us anymore because they don't trust America anymore or this leadership. And this is where, again, we know certain of these folks have authoritarian tendencies and want to ignore the law and Constitution. And if my Republican friends don't grow a spine on this, if they're going to say, okay, we're going to just take a partisan briefing on whether we put our troops in harm's way, where the heck are we headed in this country? Where is the outright? Now, some of my friends have said, yes, we thought it was weird, and a couple of folks have now made comments. But the idea that this is going to somehow be excused as a process foul, the fact that this is going on and nobody's getting fired. I remind you, too, this is not the first time. This is not a, oops, we made a mistake. When the president bombed Iran, they didn't call the Democrats. They only called certain Republicans. This is just not the way our government's supposed to work.
What are we doing? What are we doing in the Eastern Pacific? What are we doing in the Caribbean? Is the goal to blow up drug boats, or and we're going to apparently maybe go into Venezuela? What is the goal? Is it regime change?
Listen, Katie, you would think, as the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I ought to be able to answer that. They've not even showed the legal justification. What happens with our sailors in any kind of international court of law if there's not a legal justification? The truth is, I think the Biden administration should have pushed back harder against Venezuela when the Venezuelan people got out and voted in record numbers to get rid of Maduro. He's a bad guy. But the idea now that we have sent an aircraft carrier, a bunch of other naval ships, the aircraft carrier based in Norfolk is down there. And these are the same sailors' families who said months ago, holy heck, why is this Signal Gate giving away our most classified information on a non-classified channel? Why is nobody held accountable? These same sailor families are now being put in harm's way, and their senator, and it was a senior Democrat, isn't getting the same briefing or information. So I don't know if the goal is to get rid of the drug trafficking, and if there are drugs on all these boats, stop a couple of them, show us the drugs, show us how bad these guys are, rather than just arbitrarily blowing them up. And then if there is some goal on Venezuela, don't you have to at least read in Congress and, frankly, the American people? This was the guy, remember, Trump was going to end these endless wars. This was the guy that was going to put America first. Well, it doesn't take a great historian to realize that America's history of intervention in Central America and South America has been a pretty bad record. And if this is his plan, and to only say I'm going to only share my real plan with certain Republican members, and somehow Congress has no oversight role, guys, this is not normal. None of this is normal.
Let me ask you about your counterpart, Tom Cotton. You've spoken about how you had a good relationship with Marco Rubio when he was the head of the committee. You voted for his confirmation. You said you're still getting decent communication with him. What about Tom Cotton? Do you guys talk? Do you get along? Is there cooperation?
Listen, I'd say this. Yeah, listen, we get along. But I got to tell you, when Saxby Chambliss was chair of the committee, when Richard Burr was chair of the committee, all Republicans, frankly, when Marco was chair of the committee, I don't think anyone would have sat by and not said, isn't this a little weird? Where Congress has been asking for months since this operation started. And now we're getting a brief, and I'm looking around the room, and it's only Republicans, and it's not even
I hear
just Republicans
you. So
from the Armed Services.
My question is, why don't you think they think it's weird? Do you suspect that there's something going on? There's a coordinated effort to keep you out? Are they trying? Take it to the logical conclusion. If you're being shut out, what is it?
Well, remember, this is not the first time, because that wacko Laura Loomer didn't want me to do oversight. I got refused the ability to go do oversight at one of our key intelligence agencies. And again, the issue here is, if there's only 17 of us in the Senate to get access to this, if we don't do our job, I think the truth is, at least a big crew in the White House thinks they can completely ignore Congress. And I just don't get, I know a lot of my Republican colleagues love our country every bit as much as I do. But if they are just going to roll over time and again and excuse this kind of behavior, their heads would have exploded.
Senator, I want to get you on a couple things before we have to let you go. Donald Trump says he wants to test nukes. Good idea, bad idea? Do we need to?
Bad idea without any further explanation. I got no idea what made him change his position.
All right, let me ask you now about the shutdown. We're now very far into it. We're nearing the longest shutdown in history. SNAP benefits are going to run out this weekend. 750,000 furloughed employees not getting paid, including TSA agents and air traffic controllers who are still working. How do you see this ending?
We got to find, both sides got to find an exit ramp. And the truth, and here's the thing, again, I've been in every bipartisan gang in the last decade. My fear is, and yesterday's example is why I feel this way, that Republicans didn't raise their hand. I don't think any Republican senator can make any deal without Donald Trump's blessing. The way we did these in the past was we had to both piss off each of our own sides if we found some place in the middle. I don't think there's any ability to get a deal done without Trump. But we got to end this. The amount of pain in my state, and we got a ton of federal workers. We got people's heads exploding about the health care cost increases. I will give our governor credit. He is stepping forward with state money to fill the gap on SNAP. But, we're the richest country in the world, and we're going to have millions of Americans going without their SNAP benefits at the same time that our food banks are overloaded. This is the performance of a third world country, and these are people's lives. So we need an off-ramp, and I hope we're going to find it next week.
All right, Senator Mark Warner of the great state of Virginia, thank you very much. As you said, some money from the state's going to go to try to fill that SNAP benefit gap, at least through November. Senator, thank you so much.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Eugene Vindman of Virginia. He is a member of the Armed Services Committee.
Congressman, it struck me that the sound that we just played, the lawmakers sound just incensed and irate. And I'm wondering if you share that same sentiment, because as this story was unfolding today, to me, this is about secrecy. This is about the sidelining of career military leaders. It's about a lack of transparency. And I just bring your attention to Admiral Halsey. OK, this was from the New York Times on October 16th. While Admiral Halsey has been the highest ranking military officer overseeing the airstrikes, the decision to carry them out, this is about those boats, has been driven by the White House. And the strikes themselves have been conducted by Special Operations Forces, with Admiral Halsey largely cut out of the decision making. This is a foreign policy that does not seem to have guardrails, sir.
Well, look, we're talking about life and death. The president claims we're in a war. It's important we get this right. And from today's hearing, frankly, I left with more questions than answers.
More questions than answers. Here's another thing I have questions about. I'm sure you saw what the president put on Truth Social shortly before his meeting with Xi Jinping. Let me read it to you. Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. OK, so let's talk about all the things that are wrong with this. One, does he not know the difference between nuclear weapons and nuclear capabilities? Does he know the difference but is choosing to share the existence of nuclear weapons? And while he probably thinks that this is somehow acting as a deterrent, are you at all concerned that he just set off a nuclear arms race?
The president is very much shooting from the hip. The United States has tested nuclear weapons more than China and Russia combined. And we don't need the president shooting from the hip, injecting uncertainty into nuclear testing or anything to do with nuclear weapons. I mean, the prudent thing for him to do is, frankly, back off of what he said, recognize that he made a mistake. If he was looking for leverage, this was not the way to do it.
Well, to that point, Congressman, look, I've always believed when it comes to Trump, he's living in the 1950s. It's a 1950s view of the American economy. It's a 1950s view of our relationship with our allies when it comes to things like tariffs. There's a 1950s view when it comes to what we're seeing playing out now with Russia. You're absolutely right, sir. Between Russia and the United States, we own the nuclear corner. 90% of all the nukes in the world rests in those two spots. So the idea of testing has ramifications for sure. but it also speaks to a different time. I was struck by what the vice president had to say. I'd like you to listen to it, and we can have a little chat about it on the other side.
I think the president's truth speaks for itself. We have a big arsenal, obviously. The Russians have a large nuclear arsenal. The Chinese have a large nuclear arsenal. Sometimes you've got to test it to make sure that it's functioning and working properly.
Is that how our nuclear program works? I mean, is that the plan? We just test it? I mean, it's like I got to go outside and sort of test drive the car to make sure it's working.
Turn the sprinklers on.
Turn the sprinkler system on, see if that's working. How about if I go flip a few light switches and see if they work? I mean, what are these folks talking about? Do they really understand what's at stake here when they make these types of moves and what it means geopolitically?
Sorry. No, they really don't. Look, the nuclear arsenal is tested on a regular basis. Every component of the nuclear arsenal is tested. There are supercomputers that are modeling this stuff. We've tested these systems repeatedly. There is no need to do a sort of live fire test of a nuclear weapon. It has been done since the early 90s, and
George Bush
opens up a Pandora's box that we don't want to get into. So, I mean, it's nonsense. It's poorly thought through. I think, the VP is trying to cover for the president, who's obviously shooting from the hip. That's my take on it.
What is just so wild to me, Simone, is how all these stories begin to connect, right? You can't just talk about what is happening off the coast of Venezuela. You can't just talk about the fact that the president of the United States has repositioned one of our largest ships, has taken it away from a place where it was intended to be in the Mediterranean near Europe, where there are multiple conflicts raging, decided to replace it in a place where he has a dubious set of actions going on, a constantly evolving rationale for why it is. And in all of it is giving Congress absolutely no oversight, right? I mean, he is not allowing them to do the very basic functions of their job.
It is so true. And I said this earlier in this week, and I think that it is unfortunately a continuing theme for the next couple of months, if not years. Our Constitution is not weakened. Our Constitution itself is strong. What is weak and what is dangerous about this moment is the political will of the people and entities and organizations and institutions that are supposed to be the guardrails to defend it. And Congressman, as a taxpaying citizen, I am pissed off. As a lady from Nebraska, okay, I got a 402 phone number still. I am irate that there are not more members of Congress, more Republican members of Congress, who are not standing up for the American people in this moment, who are not asserting their duty as a co-equal branch of government.
Well, look, it's not much reassurance, but inside the classified room, there were Republicans that were vocal and that had a problem with what, in my mind, and many others, amount to illegal strikes. I mean, we have a situation where there's evidence sufficient to kill these people, and they're drug traffickers by all accounts, although that's not completely proven. Scores of strikes, scores of people killed, dozens of strikes. And Republicans complain about it behind closed doors, but they're too afraid to come out and complain about it to the public. And it's undermines our authority as a Congress, the constitutional authority to declare war, oversight. It's really, these Republicans are ceding the power of Congress to the White House.
Speaking of the power of Congress, let's talk about something that is happening in your home state of Virginia. This headline from the New York Times just yesterday: in fight for control of Congress, Virginia House takes a step towards a new map. Your state is now the latest to get involved in this redistricting conversation that is happening nationwide. Do you support what Dems in the State House are doing?
Well, look, the Democrats in Virginia are prepared to fight fire with fire. We didn't start this fight. The president has directed his minions in Texas, in North Carolina, in Kansas, Missouri, and other places to redistrict. And the answer is quite simple. Democrats in Virginia didn't start the fight, but they're willing to finish it. This is all about making sure we have the option to take a referendum to the people. In the Republican states, it's the Republican legislatures they're acting by fiat, and we cannot unilaterally disarm. And so I'm proud of what Virginia Democrats are doing, and we have to fight fire with fire.
Tonight, let's just start with what's actually happening. Indefinite, unending troops in the streets, military rule. If that sounds harsh, if it sounds even hyperbolic, and we all know the media sometimes can seem that way, that is the update to what Donald Trump is already doing, but what he now says quite clearly out in the open he wants to continue to do, which is to have the troops in the streets through next year. So while you can debate whether this or that city has this or that problem that could be fixed in a week or two or a month, now he's just saying, no, he wants the troops out in the streets for a long time. I can't say indefinite. I mean, eventually this term comes to an end. He's a lame duck second-term president, but thousands of National Guard troops already patrolling Washington are receiving these formal extended orders. And here's how they're reported. Quote, open-ended. I'm going to leave this up for a second because, again, we live in a time where people debate each other and you say, well, was the news anchor, was he exaggerating? Is this against Trump? No, this is what they say they want. It is un-American in the sense that our Constitution forbids quartering soldiers and having soldiers in our lives and cities indefinitely. But it is literally what the extension now is. So Trump's National Guard D.C. deployment extends into next year without any basis that we would know. There's not some ongoing occupation or terrorism or riots that we would normally use the Guard for. There's not some giant unrest, ongoing basis, but the extension is, quote, open-ended until the mission is considered complete, which is up to the government. The Pentagon is ordering the Guard to also create what they're calling quick reaction forces, and this would be all over the place, in every state, where 500 soldiers and groups will get non-lethal training in crowd control, handling of detainees, use of batons, stun guns, and body shields. That, according to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, an outlet, of course, owned by Rupert Murdoch, part of the Fox News empire, also getting sued by Donald Trump right now, but that's the Journal's take. So even for those skeptical about where the sourcing is coming from and whether this is all as bad as it sounds, I can tell you, according to the Journal, it is as bad as it sounds, because while training is generally a good thing, and a lot of people advocate that anyone doing policing or crowd control should be trained, remember, we're talking about the military. And there are a bunch of other more fitting layers of government that are actually already trained to do that work. It's the local police. Sometimes it's the state marshals. It's the people who report up locally to your local governor and representatives, which again is in the Constitution, that policing power should first always be as close to the people as possible. There are federal crimes, and they are, of course, investigated by the FBI, but when you deal with most crimes, it's your local police that you're dealing with and your local courts. That's how it's always been. So it is noticeably odd, against the backdrop of the president also wanting an indefinite presence in the capital of the military, that now they want the military to be able to do more of this. How's it going? Well, we've had scenes of violence that raise the question of whether it is the presence of some of the agents themselves that are causing the danger in these local places they're patrolling. There is video surfacing of an ICE agent basically assaulting a 57-year-old woman during lawful First Amendment protected protests of what ICE was doing in Colorado, arresting another individual. And this eventually came to a head, apparently because the woman was sort of, you might say, trolling or badgering the agent. Remember, whether you agree with how people talk to the police or the federal agents in this country, that's your right, your First Amendment right. You can criticize them. You can ask them questions. This is the exchange.
Show your face. Oh, dude. You can't take my phone. You cannot. Oh, that's illegal, sir. That's kidnapping. Hey! Get off of her! Stop that Hey! You need to get off of her right now. Get off. Get the off her. You stole her phone. Hey!
and you can see it go forward like that. It is a disturbing image, and while we always caution when we do reporting that you have to look at the before and after, this is a clip. If this were a court of law, you would need to know more before you could say whether the agent there had violated the law. It certainly doesn't look like responsible patrol and policing, and most of these federal agents aren't usually, as I reminded you, dealing with local policing. So maybe they're making more mistakes, violating policy, hurting people. And maybe this work should go back to the normal process of local policing. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker asking the DHS, as Nicole Wallace recently reported, to pause operations at least during the Halloween celebration.
I've sent a letter to Kristi Noem and to the Department of Homeland Security leadership asking them to pause all of their federal agent operations for the entirety of the Halloween weekend. I'm asking for basic human decency. Show us this is about something other than you just causing mayhem.
The governor there alleging that they are trying to cause mayhem. Now, a lot of these agents have a job. They work for the federal government, and they're being sent these places. And some of them may just be trying to do the job and get by. It is a fact that when you look at these situations, for every terrible video, there may be 100 other agents honestly just trying to get through the day. But the policies are suspect to begin with. The Constitution does not view federal power as something that is the first resort for policing the public, nor the military, which is supposed to protect us from foreign enemies and protect the borders and protect us in war. Constitution does not view the military as the place for a president to bend the people to his will. I'm joined by Reverend Al Sharpton, who's the host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. He's the founder of the National Action Network. He's, of course, a longtime civil rights activist and around New York. He's known Donald Trump or all the different versions of Donald Trump. What do you see in this bending of military powers?
I think that Donald Trump is having his ultimate dream of having the trappings of a ruler/dictator, because there's really no evidence that there's a functional reason, for example, for Washington, D.C., for the military and the guards to stay there till next year. There's not been any roundup of a lot of people there that should not have been there illegally. There have been incidents, as we saw in Colorado. There was another one in Chicago. So you have to say they're not doing this to stem a tide of crime or of illegal people there. So what are you doing? You're feeding his self-image that I am king. That's why I wanted the military parade that nobody came to. That's why in the middle of a government shutdown and people losing SNAP, I'm going to spend $300 million on a ballroom because I am king. And that's what we're looking at. And the sickness of it is that the citizens are paying for themselves being the victims of this kind of delusional power.
Yeah, these are your tax dollars. I wonder about whether you call it existential, that's a nice word, or absurdly hypocritical premise of all this for Trump. Because they say it's an emergency. They say it's a rebellion. They say it's unrest. But if it were any of those things, why don't we see that? Why isn't there evidence of that? And in the case of D.C., as emphasized, it can't just be an emergency forever, unending into next year. If you go to D.C., and you and I are there all the time, we got reports from there, they got a lot of soldiers around, but it's a pretty quiet, peaceful streets.
And when you look at the fact, take D.C., for example, when I've been in and out of there, they're mostly in Georgetown and in other areas that there's not only high crime, there's not a lot of, quote, illegal people there. So what emergency? When did the emergency start? Where does it end? And how do you gauge the emergency? Oh, but we're really not there for an emergency. It's all kinds of window dressing. And again, it's to play to his ego that he's a military ruler and that he is in charge. And it's also to try and assuage the public that they're doing something. And I think that we really need to be more vocal about this. And taxpayers, particularly now, when we're seeing shutdowns and SNAP money, I mean, we're seeing real problems.
Well, that goes to the protest, which is something you've done your whole life. Rachel's talked about the power of it. I've heard you say, do you want to be a thermometer or a thermostat? Right? Because you can change the temperature. And the Supreme Court and these courts they have rules. But everyone's noticed that sometimes they look around and they're trying to get a sense of where the country is. And the court right now is blocking Chicago, and the Trump administration's not violating that. They're following that, and these troops have an obligation to follow that. But the Washington Post reports Supreme Court asked for more briefs on the Chicago deployment. The justices won't rule at least till mid-November, which leaves Trump's troop deployment blocked until they rule, because that's what the lower courts have done. Where does that fit in? That the protests, no kings, people saying this is not okay, this is not American, as the courts look around and figure out what's the breaking point. And in fairness, I want to say, you don't just slap the president's hand the first day of a deployment. I don't care what party. If the president on day one does something with the military, throughout our history, you usually leave it. But on day 30 and day 60, the courts eventually are going to have to adjudicate.
No, I think that the marches, the protests, whether it was no kings, whether it's been other union protests, whether it's what we did on the Wall Street protest, that is necessary. If you look at American history, just the last half century, civil rights movement, we got the Civil Rights Act of 64, Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act of 65, by marching in Birmingham, by marching in Selma, Alabama. We didn't get it in the cloakroom in the Capitol. The same thing with women's movements. The women's liberation movement in the streets is what changed the laws. Same thing we've seen in terms of war and poverty. So I think that it is the eruption of these movements of different races, different ages, that will make the courts and everybody has to say, wait a minute, we've got to look at this more fairly. And